Sony's cinema line combines high-end digital cinema imagery and workflow with operability, expandability, and reliability that ideally support today's creators. We listen to feedback from creators and apply the most evolved technology available to fulfill their creative needs. Our aim is to put that know-how and capability in the hands of a wider range of users. And now, we proudly introduce a new addition to the cinema line.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Leap into the world of filmmaking. Cinema Line.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. The Sony FX30. So what we're looking at right now is the Sony FX30. It's the latest camera from Sony, which is a part of them cinema line, as they're saying right now, the cinema line. I don't know if I want to call this camera a cinema camera, but Sony is putting it in their cinema line. If you know anything about Sony and their recent release, they released a camera called the FX3, and they also released a camera called the FX6. So now the FX6 is the big boy. That's the big camera that I would consider more a cinema camera. I think it have ND in it and stuff like that. The FX3 now is more like the A7S3, but in a more rugged body, or a body that you doesn't necessarily need a cage in order to attach accessories to it. This now is the latest one, the FX30. And the FX30 is the same body as the FX3, but it is a the FX30 is the same body as the FX3, but it is a Super 35 sensor, as opposed to the FX3, which is a full frame sensor. So one of the great thing about this is that because it's a Super 35 sensor, it's a cheaper camera than the FX3. The FX3 was about 3,000 thereabout, and this is under 2,000. That's amazing news. So we're going to be checking it out, see the press release, because this is basically the press release that Sony put out, the product announcement, and we're going to be going through it and talk about the differences. I watched it before, so I kind of have an idea as to what they're talking about, but we're going to just walk through it and see what it looks like, and I'll point out some of the features that I am happy about, very happy about, and let's just watch it and see what's going on.
FX30. The new FX30 makes the cinema line, with the incredible Venice 2 digital cinema camera at its peak, more accessible than ever. While maintaining the same look, operability, and workflow potential as the rest of the cinema line, the camera has been designed primarily for new creators embarking on their visual production journey. It features a new back-illuminated XMOR-R APS-C size CMOS sensor that captures industry-standard Super 35mm movie footage. This
Yes, so that's what we're talking about. As you can see, it's a Super 35 CMOS sensor, 20.1 megapixel backlit, back illuminated sensor with 14 stop of latitude. That's amazing. For a camera with this price, that's an actually amazing sensor in this camera.
Remarkable new sensor offers 14 plus stops of latitude and a wide color gamut. Oversampled 4K recordings from the 6K sensor produce
So it has a 6K sensor, but they oversample it down to 4K. They have been doing that in cameras for a while now. So the camera have a 6K sensor and you oversample it and get a 4K sensor. What that does when it comes to a camera, if you notice anything with the recent release of the iPhone 14, which they have a 48 megapixel camera, but they're super sampling or binning it down to a 12 megapixel camera. So what actually happened is that more pixels are packed into the 4K, which results in better quality. Not over the top quality, but better quality so that persons can, get a better picture. It will help with low light capabilities because of the bigger sensor. So as I say, they don't sample it to that, and let's just watch some more.
Movies with low noise and natural contours. The performance of the new sensor in the FX30 is optimized to support the creator's vision. The S-Cinetone Gamma Curve captures cinematic expression with natural skin tone, without the need for complicated grading. The S-Log3 Gamma Curve is a great choice for creators aiming at an individual look. Flexible color grading is a key element of visual production.
Yes, I'm glad that it has features like Cinetone and S-Log3, because what this does is that if you're using Cinetone, if you know anything about color grading and you're using Cinetone, it's a much easier profile to work with as opposed to working with S-Log3. But it also has the capability of S-Log3. So the person who understands color grading, understand LUTs and all of these things and how to bring their footage from flat to the color profile that they want to do is capable of doing so, because this camera gives you all these features. As I said, so far, I'm enjoying it. So far, it looks good. So let's just continue watching and see what they talk about.
Workflows. Even subtle changes in color and contrast can dramatically alter the mood of a scene. The FX30 provides the grading flexibility needed to accurately express the creator's intent. At the core of this capability is the S-Log3 log format that is a common feature throughout the cinema line. The S-Log3 Gamma Curve is easy to handle and provides wide latitude in workflows that include post-production color grading. For S-Log3 recording, the FX30 provides the flexible ISO mode, Cine EI Quick Mode, and Cine EI Mode.
All right, so let's talk about these modes. These modes are important. They're going to explain it coming up. But these modes are important because when you are a content creator and you want to create content, especially content on the go, sometimes it's best to make the camera do the work as opposed to you're fiddling with features and stuff like that. Instead of you're trying to move around and change a lot of settings, if the camera allows you to do certain things like this flexible ISO and Cine L Quick and Cine L, these are settings that you can put the camera when you're in log mode, which allows you to do certain things. It gives you more flexibility in terms of working, especially if you are a run and gun or you are shooting this by yourself. So I appreciate it. They'll explain it, but as I said, I watched it before, so let them just explain it and see what they're talking about.
For general movie shooting, you might want to keep the shutter speed and aperture fixed while adjusting ISO sensitivity for optimum exposure. Exposure adjustment is easy in the flexible ISO mode, where ISO is automatically adjusted on the fly to compensate for changing lighting.
Now that's what we're talking about, you know what I mean? Flexible ISO. So the ISO is basically doing what it needs to do based on the lighting scenario. And once you move from one scenario to a next scenario, the ISO will ISO will basically take care of that. So you don't have to focus on the ISO or even focus on what the camera is doing. Once the situation change, the camera adjusts to that situation.
The Cine EI mode is often used in cinema industry when in-depth post-production will be used for cinematic expression. That makes it possible to leave ISO fixed at the camera's base ISO for maximum quality, while adjusting the exposure index so that ideal exposure can be achieved during post-processing. Keeping ISO at base ISO maximizes latitude and image quality, providing an ideal foundation for grading to cinematic standards. The FX30 has two base ISO settings, ISO.
All right, so let's talk about this base ISO thing and what it means. So, when it comes to videography or even photography, what the ISO does is basically light sensitivity. So, the sensor have a certain amount of sensitivity, and you use ISO to pump up the sensitivity in order to get a certain quality image. Now, these base ISO, why you want to have base ISO on a camera is when you start to play with the settings or you're going to certain log. I have it on my camera. I'm not sure what the base ISO is on the A7 III, but once you're going to S-Log3, the ISO jump to a certain number. And 800 base ISO is actually a good base ISO, which reduce the amount of noise that you will get in the image, because even though 800, you still would have to use an ND filter if you're going outside. So you still need an ND filter on the front of the camera in order to capture with S-Log3 outside. But 800 base ISO is actually a good starting point. I like that.
800 and ISO 2500. Both base ISO settings offer nearly identical low noise performance, one at low sensitivity and one at high sensitivity. Cine EI is the best way to achieve high image quality and engaging expression in situations where the shooting environment, including lighting, can be carefully controlled. Shooting with a log curve usually means you have a low contrast image on the monitor. Like other cinema-line cameras, the FX30 lets you monitor an image that is closer to the final look in terms of color and brightness by applying an internal S.
I love this. So applying LUTs, lookup table, is important when you're doing almost anything. What happens is that you want to see the image almost like how it's going to be graded, like how you're going to be putting it out, especially if you are accommodating, for instance, a client and you have them looking at the picture profile, for instance, on a monitor. You want them to see what it's going to look like, not the flat image, because when you put the flat look in front of a client, they don't necessarily understand. If you are doing big productions, most big productions, they will have a external monitor, which also can put a lookup table or a LUT on it. So if you don't have that big production settings, this camera allows you to put a LUT on it, which means anything that the person is using it, your client is using to observe what you're shooting, they can also see an image that is close enough to what you're gonna grade it. So this is actually good. As a matter of fact, you can actually make your LUT based on how you plan to grade it and let them see almost like a one-to-one situation with the LUT that you put on it. So I like that this has internal LUT. Most professional monitors allows you to add a LUT to it, but I like the fact that it has internal LUT. Love that.
709 LUT to the monitor image. Original user LUTs can be imported and used too. Exposure index and LUT information used in the various modes is recorded as metadata and automatically applied to the footage in compatible editing software, providing a seamless, efficient workflow from shooting through editing. LUTs can be baked into the image while shooting as an alternative to using the flexible ISO, Cine EI Quick, or Cine EI mode in combination with color grading. In addition to the preset LUTs, you can import your own favorite LUTs into the camera. Sony offers an extensive range of prime and zoom lenses that can change the way images are captured and presented. You might choose a bright prime lens to create beautiful background bokeh, a wide-angle lens for more immersive images, or a power zoom lens for smoothly adjustable angle of view or dolly zoom effects. And then there are full-frame G Master Series lenses for creators who want the ultimate in resolution and smooth bokeh. Combining the FX30 with any of Sony's high-performance lenses gives you the very best AF performance, image stabilization.
All right, let's talk about lens for a second. Lenses. Now, one of the reasons why I want to talk about lenses is that as a photographer, as a videographer, the lenses are very important. So the lens are very important, and also the options when it comes to lens are very important. Now, when I just started out, I started out using Nikon. I was a big fan of Nikon. I can't necessarily remember which Nikon I had, but I had a Nikon. And then I switched to camera. I think I got Canon. I got the 5D Mark III at the time. And the 5D Mark III was a very good camera. I enjoyed it while I had it. I think I even still have the 50mm, this 1.2 50mm lens that I bought with that camera. As a matter of fact, a lot of my lenses are Canon lens, which I use a Metabones adapter for my Sony cameras. So I bought that lens and I was using the Canon for a while, and then Sony stole the game. Sony made videography or content creation much easier with their cameras. The 5D kind of was the camera that started that type of revolution, but Sony has stolen the game. And even though Sony stole the game, one of the problems that Sony had was the lens range. So Sony had to go back and build out a lens system, and the G Master system is a system they have been working on, and they have been working on a lot of lenses, the power zoom lenses, the prime lenses, and these lenses are the reason why Sony is one of the top camera manufacturers right now, because one time you'd like, oh, you know, I would love to go Sony, but I cannot get the right lens. They don't have the lens. They don't have the 200mm. They don't have the, you know, and they still don't have all the lenses that Canon has. Canon has way more lenses than this, but these lenses are a good, what I call it now, a good amount of lens that it will satisfy most of the needs of persons who are trying to use the Sony line. And I really appreciate that Sony has reached this part that they can allow you to lose a wider range of lens. And these are a lot of lenses, but we're looking at probably like about 30 or 40 lenses there. So I'm glad that Sony is at this level right now.
And other functionality that both body and lens can deliver. Real-time tracking, for example, focuses on moving subjects and stays locked on. And when shooting people, birds, or animals, real-time IAF ensures that focus is precisely and reliably maintained even as the subject moves.
All right, now let's talk about the IAF. So eye autofocus tracking and what has been happening with the autofocus game as it relates to the camera world. So at first, Canon was the company who had the autofocus cameras. Like when you have a Canon camera, you shoot in videos, you can get real autofocus thing. Now, autofocus is not such a big thing when it comes to a camera, because all the different camera systems, except like Blackmagic and these companies, have been focusing a lot of energy on autofocus. Sony, Nikon, even Fuji has been focusing. All these cameras have been all these companies have been focusing their energy on autofocus. And Sony is at a level right now where autofocus is it's sublime. It's on that level. And I believe that all the companies are on that level. But we're talking about the eye tracking, we're talking about the continuous focus, we're talking about all these focus. Sony has been bringing more cameras with better autofocus off lately. Because my camera, the A7 III, the autofocus is good, but it's not great. My camera, the A7R2, autofocus is good, but it's not great. But Sony latest camera like the A7S3, the FX3, all these cameras, the autofocus in them is amazing. When I say amazing, I mean amazing. And Sony did it again with this FX30. As a matter of fact, I'm actually recommending the FX30 to somebody who is trying to do more like a company who will be doing podcasts and stuff like that. So I'm saying, yo, this is the camera. The price is reasonable. It's Super 35, so you don't have to buy the expensive lens. And it has all the features of the FX3. Get 3 of these and basically build out your podcast. So it's an amazing camera so far.
Outstanding focus tracking means consistent pinpoint focus in situations where autofocus is required, such as when using a gimbal to shoot 4K 120p footage with deep background bokeh. Leave focusing to the camera while you give full attention to framing and composition. There is also an active mode that contributes to smooth, stable footage when shooting handheld while walking around. And with compatible lenses from Sony, a breathing compensation function can effectively eliminate focus breathing. Breathing compensation can even be applied during post-production, providing even greater.
All right, this might be a little bit technical, but what is focus breathing? Focus breathing is when the lens is focused, but you see it's like it's jumping. It's like it's just like going out of focus little by just look out of focus. So they have put in a feature that they call a feature that's called breathing compensation. So the breathing compensation kind of allow you to eliminate that, and you also can eliminate it in post, which is amazing. The next thing I wanted to realize, I just saw that this camera has 4K 20, which is very similar to the 4K 20 that 4K 120, which is very similar to the 4K 120 that the FX3 has. However, the 4K 120, based on some of the reviews that I've watched, is a crop. So the 4K 120 is cropped in a lot. So it's probably like about a 2-point crop. So you have to take that into consideration if you want to get a camera like this, because if you don't understand that it's a crop, you might think it's the same. It's more cropped than the FX3. So the FX30 4K 120 is more cropped than the FX3. So if you have on a 35mm lens, it probably look like a 50 or a 60mm lens when you're going to 4K 120. However, it's amazing to have 4K 120. Because you can always, if you want a wider shot, you can always just step back a couple feet or a couple meters, depending on where, which one of the metrics you use.
Shooting freedom. The FX30 features a number of functions that support shooting in various situations. Significant refinements have been made to the camera's controls, interface, and expandability, packing extraordinary operability into a compact, rugged body. Commonly used parameters and settings are all visible and direct.
All right, so one thing I like the settings on this camera. So the current Sonys that I have, the settings are much different. It doesn't look like this. And this refined setting, these new settings that Sony is using, I believe is much more understandable. It's much easier to understand, and you can just click on stuff and change them right there on your screen, as opposed to digging through menus to find stuff. And I'm sure the programming buttons on the camera can allow you to do stuff much faster, but it's much easier at a glance. You can know that you're in 422 10-bit, you know what I mean, XAVC, S4, 4K, your S-Log3, your white balance is 5500K, your f-stop 5.6. At a glance, you can know exactly what settings the camera is in, which I appreciate that, because sometimes you just want to check what setting, especially when you're shooting in multiple scenarios and you're changing settings. you want to be able to get a quick identifier, a quick understanding of what settings your camera is in. And I like this new setup.
Directly accessible via the main menu screen. The function menu can be called up at any time simply by swiping up on the screen. Key settings and information are...
I also like this setting that if you notice what we're looking at right now, you're seeing the full picture. There's no information overlaid on the picture itself. You're seeing all the information around the picture. You see the mics, you see that you're shooting autofocus continuous, S-Log3, standby, 4K 24p, the amount of time you have left on your memory card, the amount of battery you have left, your shutter speed, your iris, you see your metering, you also see, what is that? I'm not sure what that is, but you also see your white balance. So it's not overlaid on the picture, which depending on the settings that you're shooting in with my camera, when the information is overlaid on the picture, sometimes it's very difficult to see. So I like that they made this addition. I think it's also in the FX3, but I like that it looks like this because it's just easier to read when it's on a black background as opposed to on the picture.
Shown in the black frame on the monitor, so the user can concentrate on the image without being distracted by the settings. A tally lamp that is visible from just about any angle shows when recording is in progress, preventing errors while shooting.
I must stress how important this is. As a videographer and as a YouTuber, somebody who shoots themselves a lot, alone, having a tally light on the camera to let you know that the camera is actually shooting is very, very, very important. Because having a tally light gives you the confidence that your camera is actually recording. Because a lot of time you'll be shooting, you believe you press the button and you realize, oh shoot, it wasn't recording, which is not a good feeling. That have happened to me multiple times. And even the other day I was playing football and I pressed the record button on my GoPro, and it's at the end of the match I realized that it wasn't recording. I lost the footage. Now, if it had a tally light now that I could have run past the GoPro and like, yo, why I'm not seeing the red light blinking or something of the sort, then I would say, oh, it's probably not recording. So having a tally light on your camera is important. And if you notice, based on what they show, the tally light is on the front, it's on the top, and around the image itself on the back of the camera, you see red. So you know that the camera is recording. So I love that feature.
Wi-Fi on the 5 GHz and 2.4 GHz bands, plus Bluetooth, allows recorded data to be quickly transferred to a mobile device after shooting. A durable magnesium alloy chassis has 5 threaded holes and a multi-interface shoe for convenient mounting of accessories such as high-performance microphones. An XLR handle unit provides extra handling ease for low-angle shots, as well as direct connection of XLR microphones for enhanced sound quality. The FX30 offers the kind of reliability users expect from the cinema line, with extraordinary operability and toughness in a lightweight body. It is also easy on the environment, using recycled plastic for molded components. 2 slots that are compatible with CF Express Type A cards as well as SD memory cards provide extra data security through simultaneous recording. 320GB and 640GB CF Express Type A cards can be used for high performance and extended recording time.
All right, so you want those cards, the CF Express A card, when you're doing certain things. For instance, like you're doing 4K 120. That's the reason why you'll want those type of cards. And I love that it has multiple cards, which means that you can record on one and on the next one. Just in case that something happened to one of your cards, the next card can be a backup. I also love that it has, mounting points. It's made out of the magnesium alloyed body. It has a lot of mounting points on it that you can connect it, put your mic on. it just has a lot of different mounting point, but this is not new. This is also in the, this is not new. It's also in the FX3. So the body itself is the FX3 body. So if you know anything about the FX3, it's not much different from the FX3. But these cards, you notice the amount of gigabytes on these cards, the 320 gigabytes. Tough. CF Express A card. These cards are if you're doing 4K 120 and you're sending a lot of data to the camera itself. These cards allow you to capture that type of data.
Cards can be used for high performance and extended recording time. Heat is effectively managed by a fan and heat sink system so that recording can continue throughout extended shooting sessions. An HDMI terminal allows connection to an external monitor or RAW recorder.
All right, so this is the next important thing that we need to talk about. So what this allows you to do, even though the camera can record internally at 10-bit, if you're using a recorder, an external recorder, for instance, like a Ninja V or one of those external recorder by Atomos, because I think it's an Atomos external recorder. That might be a Sony external recorder. It's a Sony product anyway. You can record 16-bit. Now, 16-bit give you much more latitude than a 10-bit. So while the camera can record 10-bit internally, 422 10-bit, you can record 16-bit out of this camera. That's amazing.
The FX30 can even be connected to an Xperia Pro I smartphone that functions as a large external display via USB. The camera's USB terminal can be connected to other devices, allowing it to be used as a high-performance webcam for live streaming. Timecode input via the multi-micro USB terminal can be used to synchronize multicam setups. Befitting its status as a member of the cinema line, with the Venice 2 cinema camera at the top of the family tree. The FX30 is an ideal gateway model with a newly developed sensor and color science inherited from the most eminent family in digital cinema. With features like S-Cinetone contributing to a natural cinematic look, it is a perfect first camera for creators wanting to move up to serious movie production. S-Log 3 and the Cine EI mode are common throughout the cinema line, providing the foundation for a high-level movie production workflow that includes color grading to create any type of look or mood the creator desires. Sony also offers a range of E-mount lenses, high-performance microphones, and other accessories that can boost creative freedom. The FX30 opens the door to new cinematic expression. Leap into the world of filmmaking. Cinema Line FX30.
All right, so yes, the FX30 is now launched. It's an amazing camera, joins the cinema lineup, and I'm still not so sure about the cinema line because the FX30 is very much like the FX3, and the FX3 to me wasn't really a cinema camera. They call it the cinema camera, understand that it has features that allows you to pair it with cameras such as the FX6 and the Venice because you're using the same color science. They even use the same look in terms of how the camera is colored. You know, it has the gray and the black just like the Venice and just like the FX6. But Sony's calling it cinema line, so we'll just work with it. So this is the FX30, not to be confused with the FX3 because the FX3 and the FX30 looks the same. They look the same, like you will mistake them if you don't know the difference. However, this is a much cheaper camera. As I said earlier, I was trying to find the price. Let me get the price of the FX3. So the FX3 is almost $4,000. So I'm looking at B&H right now, and B&H say it's $3,899. We're talking about $3,900 plus tax. You're looking at $4,000. Now the FX30 price is according to Adorama and B&H, it's gonna be roughly $1,800. Add tax to that, you're talking about probably $2,000, look a bit over $2,000. So you're knocking off $2,000 if you buy this camera as opposed to buying the FX3 with very similar features. Mind you, we're talking about full frame, we're talking about Super 35, we're talking about certain type of crop when we're using 4K 120. There's a lot of little small downgrade to it, but for the average content creator, this is a much better camera as opposed to the FX3. Reason being, an average content creator is not going to be doing a lot with their camera, so to speak. It has the autofocus. It has a lot of features, which allows you to use it very similar to the FX3. It has all the features, I would say, of the A7S3, which when the A7S3 dropped the other day, well, not the other day, but probably like about a year or almost 2 years ago, the content creation world was blown away. And then they dropped the FX3, which a lot of persons who are content creator sold their, not necessarily sell, but most of them actually went and bought the FX3. So this now, the FX30, is something that you can buy even if you already have an FX3 and pair it to it, and the color grading and all of that workflow is very similar, if not the same. So I'm quite impressed with this new FX3, and even though I'm not in the market right now for a camera, this is a camera that I will definitely look into when I get into the market of buying a camera. As I said earlier, I recommended this camera to a friend who will be buying some cameras to do podcasts in the coming months about November. So I'm recommending this camera as opposed to the A7S3 or the FX3. An amazing camera. Sony did it again. The autofocus on it so far is amazing. I've watched a couple reviews and everybody is saying, yo, this is a good camera. And the price point, I must stress, the price point of this camera is very good. It's very competitive. Very competitive. And while Sony is still competing with Canon and Nikon and Fuji and all these companies, this price point under $2,000 is an amazing price point. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm Shango. See you in the next one. Bless up yourself.